What's going on, everyone? Kyle Yates here of the FantasyPros Football Podcast. Thanks for joining us. As always, you can find our brand new content every week at youtube.com/fantasypros, as well as on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow while you're there. Let's get right to it because today we're taking a look at 11 players that should be on the move in your fantasy football leagues heading into week 9. Let's start off with 5 sell-high players. Number 1, Justin Fields, quarterback, Chicago Bears. Fields didn't do a ton as a passer yet again in week 8, but it's important to focus in on the fact that he had 103 rushing yards and a touchdown on 10 rush attempts. That sounds like a fantasy football dream though. Why should we be looking to trade him away if we've rostered him this entire time? The key part is that Matt Nagy was at home for this past game and wasn't able to dictate what the offense did. What did that result in? Fields being used as a runner more. Now, there's the possibility that we see that continue and Nagy finally resolves to giving Fields more designed rushing opportunities. However, there's the more likely possibility that Fields goes back to being forced to be a quick game passing option, and that's not going to work. If you can upgrade significantly at quarterback to an option that doesn't come with so many different outcomes, I'd recommend shipping Fields off. Number 2, Devante Parker, wide receiver, Miami Dolphins. Parker came back into the lineup in week 8 and instantly commanded 11 targets and put up a very solid 8 for 85 and 0 stat line with them. When he's healthy, Parker is going to be a very solid contributor as a flex option for fantasy lineups. However, him staying healthy is a major question mark at this point. If you can take Parker and flip him for a player who underperformed last week that doesn't have as many injury concerns, I'd recommend looking into it. Number 3, Cole Beasley, wide receiver, Buffalo Bills. Beasley's fantasy season has been interesting, to say the least. He's had some big performances, like what happened here in week 8, and then he's had some moments where he has completely disappeared from the game plan. Beasley has the potential to be needed in games where the Bills aren't able to pull ahead with a big lead, but those are likely going to be few and far between. With the fact that Emmanuel Sanders wasn't involved in week 8, but he will be moving forward, plus Dawson Knox's eventual return, it's probably best to move Beasley now on the heels of this massive performance and get peak value. Number 4, Chase Edmonds, running back, Arizona Cardinals. Edmonds finally found the end zone this past week for the first time all season long. He went 96 touches this season without scoring, and his touchdown totals are unlikely to suddenly spike based on his usage. Edmonds is going to have to reel in a long reception or take advantage of his very few red zone looks in order to find the end zone and push his way into the weekly top 15 conversation. He's still going to be incredibly valuable each week as a low-end RB2, but if you can take Edmonds now and flip him for someone who has higher scoring upside, this is your chance to sell high. Number 5, Keenan Allen, wide receiver, Los Angeles Chargers. Allen was able to finish as a top 15 wide receiver this past week, but his fantasy finishes before then were uninspiring. He finished as the wide receiver 58, the wide receiver 30, and the wide receiver 44 the 3 games prior to week 8 against the Patriots. While Mike Williams has fallen off significantly here recently, which opens the door for Allen to remain a viable wide receiver 2 most weeks, there's the potential that we see him fall back into that aforementioned range if he doesn't find the end zone. If you can make a swap where you can get a wide receiver who's in the same range, who comes with a little bit more consistency, it's worth considering. Let's now switch gears and talk about 6 buy low options. Number 1, Courtland Sutton, wide receiver, Denver Broncos. I was definitely concerned about Sutton's fantasy value when Jerry Jeudy came back, and it was difficult to see how he returned weekly wide receiver 2 value. Jeudy came back into the lineup though, and Sutton did next to nothing, which is going to create a panic moment for fantasy managers. We shouldn't buy Sutton at a premium price, but if you can flip another wide receiver who's overachieving for Sutton because the fantasy manager who has him thinks that his value is completely gone with Jeudy returning, that's at least worth having a conversation over. Number 2, Emmanuel Sanders, wide receiver, Buffalo Bills. It was certainly odd that Sanders left last week's game with 0 receptions on 4 targets, especially when you consider the plus matchup. Sanders had been incredibly consistent up until last week though, and there's very little reason to believe that week 8 was an indicator of what is to come. With very plus matchups on the schedule the next few weeks for the Bills, Sanders is absolutely worth going out and acquiring cheap right now before his value jumps back up. Number 3, Van Jefferson, wide receiver, Los Angeles Rams. This comes with the qualification that Jefferson is really only worth considering as the last wide receiver on your bench, but he certainly has added value right now with Deshaun Jackson's departure from the team. He'll have some flex appeal in deeper leagues here or there due to the offense that he plays in, but he has tremendous upside as an insurance policy for Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Number 4, Kyle Pitts, tight end, Atlanta Falcons. Are you going to be able to acquire Pitts for cheap in your leagues? Absolutely not. At least smart fantasy managers shouldn't be willing to let him go for cheap. However, this is a very limited buy low window where we can go after Pitts and try to pry him off of a roster, especially if we're looking to make a deep playoff push. After a down performance from him last week, it's worth seeing if you can get the other manager to budge. Number 5, Josh Jacobs, running back, Las Vegas Raiders. If you asked me whether or not I want Josh Jacobs on my team without any context involved, I'd probably say that I'd prefer other options. However, once we consider that so many other starting running backs are now out with injury, and that fantasy managers are simply trying to put anything that resembles a competent starting lineup together, Jacobs is a solid add. He's been in and out of the lineup so far this year, and the managers who have him might be frustrated with what they've been getting. I mentioned him earlier in the video, but a Chase Edmonds for Josh Jacobs trade is something I'd definitely be considering due to Jacobs' involvement around the goal line. Finally, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, Minnesota Vikings. Just like with Pitts, the likelihood that you're going to be able to swipe Jefferson off of someone else's roster for very little is next to impossible. However, he has had a couple of disappointing performances here in recent weeks, and the Vikings offense seems to be struggling lately. It's worth engaging in conversation and seeing what you can get Jefferson for if you're making a playoff run. Thank you so much for watching. Are you going to be selling off any of these players in your fantasy leagues? Let us know in the comments section below. And while you're there, hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.